In a time of darkness and green, it is your light that we need. You came to teach us how to live. Muhammad, Ya Rasulullah, you were so caring and kind. Your soul was full of light. You are the best of mankind. Muhammad, khayru khalqillah. Sallu ala Rasulillah, Habib al-Mustafa. Peace be upon.
That the word tajir was actually started by Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The word tajir is instead of simsar in the times of Jahiliyyah. Now I'll say I'm not an expert on this, and mashallah there are many mashayikh here, so I have to be very careful. So this shows that this kind of work is receiving a great deal of attention. It is being received by a number of people, old, young, men, women, from different parts of the world, different faiths and so on, because they see the importance of this project. Now, what do we mean by, what National Geographic has actually done is also, they have produced recently a book for kids out of that 1,000 inventions, so that can be used in the schools and families and so on. Rather than go and follow the same pattern of women's lib and suffragettes and so on, fight your way into the society. You don't have to fight, my good sister, because all we need to do in a Muslim society is to say, I want my right, which was 1,000 years ago, and you'll feel many times better in taking that right, because it gives you what we call, in brackets, equality in society. Muslims now are a candidate for improving upon the world, because they're starting to build their nations. Now I want to look at that. And how can one say, how did this world in the past manage to live in an economic stability situation? What kind of development, what kind of institutions? And you find that it is actually the individual behavior, the individual person, the human resource, the quality, the unit quality of a human society is what counts. And I tell you one thing, it is linked also a little bit with Oman. You'd be happy to say. Oman? What has Oman to offer to the world? Stability of the economy of the world? How could the Omanis do that? Well, I'll tell you one thing. The behavior of the Omanis, your great-great-grandfathers before, they had a special characteristic in their trades, the way they used to conduct their business.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, all praise be to Allah, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and peace and blessings be upon our beloved messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Dear brothers and sisters, I salute you all with a salutation of the people of paradise. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you all for dedicating your valuable times to be with us today. This only indicates your hunger for knowledge and wisdom. We thank you again. On behalf of the Sultan Qaboos Higher Center for Culture and Sciences and the Islamic Information Center, we welcome you all tonight to this important event. We hope that tonight's lecture will be fruitful and beneficial for all of you, and it will add something to your life, inshallah. Before we start today's event, let us all contemplate on the divine words of Almighty Allah, where Brother Asim bin Muhammad Al-Jabri will recite a few verses from Surah An-Naml, chapter 27, verse 27 until 35. Further, brother.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. قال سننظر أصدقت أم كنت من الكاذبين. اذهب بكتابي هذا فألقه إليهم ثم تول عنهم فانظر ماذا يرجعون. قالت يا أيها الملأ إني ألقي إلي كتاب كريم إنه من سليمان وإنه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألا تعلوا علي وأتوني مسلمين. قالت يا أيها الملأ أفتوني في أمري ما كنت قاطعة أمرا حتى تشهدون. قالوا نحن أولو قوة وأولو بأس شديد والأمر إليك فانظري ماذا تأمرين. قالت إن الملوك إذا دخلوا قرية أفسدوها وجعلوا أعزة أهلها أذلة وكذلك يفعلون. وإني مرسلة إليهم بهدية فناظرة بما يرجع المرسلون. صدق الله العظيم.
صدق الله العظيم. جزاك الله خير, Brother Asim. Before we start today's event, we would kindly request all of you to put your mobile phones on silent or switch them off so that we don't disturb other audience. A few thoughts that come into our minds normally are men superior to women in the field of science? Is the role of Muslim women only being housewives and raising future generations? Did Muslim women play any role in the development of science? Were there any women inventors in the dark ages? These are some of the thoughts that come into our minds. Today we have an interesting lecture by the title, Women of Science in Muslim Heritage, Role Models. Before we start today's lecture, let me say a few words about our honorable guest. No matter what we say about the professor, we will never fulfill his rich files of achievement. Our honorable guest today is Professor Salim Al-Hasani, born in Baghdad, then moved to the United Kingdom, where he started his journey, his scientific journey. The professor is the president of the Foundation of Science, Technology and Civilization, UK. He is also an Emeritus Professor of Mechanical Engineering and Professional Fellow in Humanities at Manchester University. He has created a global movement aspiring to fill the 1,000 years of amnesia in our knowledge, commonly known as the Dark Ages. With this, we would like to welcome our honorable guest, Professor Salim Al-Hasani, to give us tonight's lecture.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I've been for a few days in Oman, and I'm not only absolutely exhausted, but I'm really fascinated. It's a fascinating country and very nice people. I congratulate you. You've got a lot to be proud of, from His Majesty the Sultan all the way down to the boys and girls that are in the schools. So really there's something about this country which is, I'm not saying this being diplomatic or in any way, but I really feel it. When I'm talking about the subject, I've got to be very careful because it could be quite controversial. Some of the questions that our chairman has just put out, that I try to avoid getting involved in the politics of the women and men and the position of women in society and so on. But of course the subject is necessarily involved in that. And when I looked at Oman, I'm sorry that I haven't been studying the history and the social developments of women in Oman, but I was amazed just looking at what I see today. You know, you've got some top jobs are held by women in Oman, so you know, things are fine for women, I suppose. You know, you have ministers and you have heads of universities and heads of councils, which is really very interesting, very exciting. Now, this subject of women, of science and management I mentioned, because there is a lot of activities outside the science, which I called embrace word management. It could be, even it could embrace politics, it could embrace business as well. Right, so the word management is not meant in the very narrow sense of managing a project, although they are excellent managers in managing us as men, and managing their family, and managing children, managing, you know, all sorts of things. So women are known to be managers since the day they were created. Speaking about creation, we have a big problem in the West, and because we imitate the West, we are importing many of these problems to countries like Oman and other countries in the world. The problem is this, when we're told when we were created and Hawa, peace be upon her, was created, the shaitan has used Hawa to sort of make Adam go into deep trouble. You know, he made a big mistake and so on. Now in the West, we are told this is to do with what we call original sin. Since that philosophy taken over Europe, it wasn't quite there. In original Christianity, did not believe in original sin. But with this idea that came to Europe after Constantine, and they have restructured Christianity in Europe to suit the European tradition. So this idea of distancing women and accusing them to be the source of the problems for men has stayed, and it is still now with us today. Even in religions. I mean, you have a big struggle trying to get women to become priests, for instance. Right? There's a huge problem of having women to becoming priests. I'm not criticizing, but I think these are facts that need to be put in mind. And so when I was brought up, you know, I've been 52 years in the UK, in Manchester. And since we were brought up, this is sort of something subliminal in our mind, you know, that women had to fight to get their right in the West. There were what we call, women's lib movement, the suffragettes and so on. These ladies in Europe, they started I wouldn't say from nothing, they started from negative position of people, being creatures that have been created for the pleasure of Adam, pleasure of man. They are part of the assets of the man. They in fact don't have any soul. There is no spirit and soul. There is a huge theological argument to try to prove that women actually have soul like men. So, these poor women in the West, they had to fight their way all the way to become first normal human beings, and then to fight for their equality so that they can become equal in front of law, in society and so on. And still the problem they've not reached. So the curve of development of women in Europe and in the West in general is one of starting from a very low position and then trying their way up, fighting men and trying to create space for themselves in employment, in education, in authority, and so on. And that causes a huge problem, because when you start fighting to get rights, it causes hostilities, and it causes competitions, and it causes frustrations. And then other things starts giving way, like the structure of the family, like the relationship between men and women, because you can't have balance all the time. People have, the most difficult thing is to behave in a balanced manner. People tend to, go to one way or the other and so on. So this causes a huge problem. So what tends to be sometimes is that women want to be like men. Right? The way of the struggle sometimes go is that you just want to be like a man. And hence it causes issues. And because of the dazzling achievements in the West in science and technology, and particularly in the achievements in the film industry and through the various TV channels and modern technology, many women throughout the third world, particularly the Muslim world, they are amazed at how women are free in the West, right? And free means effectively not constrained, but some people say actually women are not free in the West, because all they're doing is trying to, the freedom, man is giving them freedom so that man can have more access to women by seeing their body, by enjoying their looks and so on. In fact, people say, some sociologists, that the only reason why women were allowed to work in England and then later on in America is that this way you can get more tax from one family, because you get two earning salaries and you get double the tax in the situation. Of course, during wars and during many situations in the socio-economic atmosphere pushes women to have to work. So I'm not here to criticize but just there are certain facts that needs to be looked at. When you look at the position of women in Muslim heritage, I call it heritage, I don't call it Islam, because Islam is the faith and religion and so on, But heritage is the cultural heritage of people who were influenced by Islam, by practicing Islam and so on. And their behavior comes out with something in between. Not Islam, not tradition completely, but a mixture of the two, right? And that's why they are different. You get Indians, Pakistanis, Arabs, Turks, and so on. They behave in various ways, but they're Muslim. So I deliberately use the word Muslim heritage, and that is the heritage is that what we receive from the past. What we see today and we receive in the past. When you look at the way women have developed in the Muslim heritage and history, you find that there is very opposite curve. The development curve of women in the West is from low to higher and higher and continuous improvement of their position, right? Whilst when you look at what happens in the Muslim world, they were quite high, right? Well, of course, they were very low before Islam. You know, some tribes used to bury girls alive, right? Because of the potential problems that they will have in society when they have girls. But when Islam came, it has improved the position of women very quickly, and it has also encouraged some of the habits amongst the Arab tribes which allowed women to become businesswomen and so on, like the wife of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. She wasn't a businesswoman when she was because of Islam. She was a businesswoman and before Islam. So there are some tribes who had, their attitude to women and the position of women was quite good. And in fact, you find in the Arab tribes, like the leaders, women leaders, like the wife of Abu Sufyan. She was effectively ruling, the opposition against the Muslims at the time. But Islam came and has enhanced this, the position, because there was a lot of aggression, a lot of inequality, and a lot of influences that come from outside, particularly from India and Persia, where the position of women was an absolute disaster. And some of it still now, some women, probably wives, has to be burnt with a dead husband just because she belongs to him. And like an asset, they just burn a woman who's alive. So this is terrible. And so, although the Arabs were isolated in the Arab Peninsula and the desert and so on, but they were influenced. So when Islam came, it seemed to have shot up very sharp. This sort of curve goes up in terms of the position of women, and we'll see that in a minute. But then, when very quickly, that position which was up seemed to have started going down, and continued to be down. But there are now indications that there are, the curve is going up, but there is a danger that it might be going up through the Western model of liberalization of women. And the Western model of liberalization of women in a traditional Muslim society causes huge disruption and political upheaval and social confusion. Right, so we've got a problem here. What do we do? Is there a Muslim model, or do we have to follow the Western model? This is an issue which is very serious, and it could be quite controversial, and it happens in every Muslim country. Right? My talk is out of this domain. I'm trying to concentrate on what we have found. We found very little, but is, I think, of significance, because there's some information which is quite new to me and probably new to you that we have found out. And we found this out not because we were trying to find out the position of women doing deliberate research. It was just that information came to us when we were looking at science and its development throughout civilizations, Chinese, Indian, Muslim, and so on. And then we began to pick up names. And that is why we seem to think that there is a huge, exciting, interesting field of research in universities and in institutions to look at the contributions of women in science and in various other related topics and fields like management, like medicine, in agriculture, in mathematics, in engineering, and so on. The information is scarce because of this so-called dark ages. Because dark ages means not enough information. We have in our mind, we have an amnesia of 1,000 years between the Greeks and the European Renaissance. And our books in schools, when it speaks about science, not only you don't have any Muslim names, there are only European names, but also you don't have any women. Even European, there's no European scientist. There's a mention of one lady at the time in Alexandria, right, Hypatia, which appears, but the rest there's no women of science, even in Europe. So let's then have a look. So what we did, as we looking through these manuscripts, we find a great guy called Al-Bayruni. Now, Al-Bayruni is important because he was the trigger of the trigger is that these are pictures, and the second picture on the bottom is supposed to depict Al-Biruni, and his he's really known to have written something like 200 books. Some people say 150, some people say 200, because it depends how you calculate books. Because see, some of the books, manuscripts, they could be in 3 or 4, or it could be 1. And as you see in many fields, he's been involved. He's what we call a polymath in the north of India, a giant, or in terms of, if one wants to take a role model, a great guy. But he has said in one of the manuscripts an interesting sentence. He says, thanks to Allah, had it not been for Rihana, I would not have been able to do my work. So, right, there is a woman behind the scene. That the saying nowadays in the UK, they say behind every successful man, there is a woman. Is that right? Yeah, see, everybody's saying. But they also, I'm going to say a joke now, the other sentence after the first one, it says, behind every unsuccessful, failed man, there are 2 women. This was, in fact, I've also learned, just before coming over here, I'm going to give you another joke. Somebody said to me, do you know the difference between complete and finish? The 2 English words, they're identical in meaning. Complete and finish, isn't it? So, what's the difference? I said, I think the same. He said, no, hold on. So he took out a piece of text and he says, when you marry the right woman, you are complete. If you marry the wrong woman, you're finished. But if you marry 2 women, you are completely finished. Right, now I don't know, some of the people in the Muslim world, they marry 4 women, and I don't know how many completely finished they are, but probably they get, I don't know. So no, let's not get into the politics of women. He said that, and that reminds us, because when you are searching, you begin to search for women in the science, right? And it's scarce information already to look at science, because the number of manuscripts that have been edited is not many. There are 5 million manuscripts in the world, Arabic manuscripts in the world. And there is a minimum of 5 million. People like Professor Qasim al-Samurai, Professor of Paleography in Holland, there's Professor Peter Pullman in Manchester. They say probably there are up to 8 million. Now, let's say 5 million. Now, how many of the 5 million have been edited? These great Muslims and rich people everywhere, billions and billions of dollars, heads of states here and there, their heritage, so you'd expect, out of the 5 million, there must have been quite a lot of them being edited, because this is your history, this is your identity, this is your culture. There's only 50,000. 50,000 only, right? And out of this 50,000, the highest in number is about religious dialogue and discussions and debates between various schools of thought, Ibadi, Shi'i, Sunni, Maliki, Hanafi, and so on. And each group fund the process of editing, because editing requires money. You give somebody and then you go on. So these projects, editing projects, have been funded through the people who are interested in the end result. And the next highest in number is about political domination, and the struggle and the fights between dynasties, this dynasty, that dynasty, and so on. Right. The next highest, you'd expect, poetry, shi'r, right? Well, they love shi'r, but I don't blame them. I mean, this lunchtime today, I sat, it's been honored to go to a very nice lunch there. And to entertain the people, one of the great Omani poets, started giving some poetry. I mean, he just really, it's so beautiful, and you enjoy it. And therefore, you wouldn't be surprised that it's the 3rd highest. But then we discovered, by the way, that through poetry, A lot of the science and knowledge has been conveyed. I didn't know this. You think poetry, that's to do with language. It isn't just to do with language and grammar. The knowledge of fiqh, right, of theology, and the knowledge of even mathematics, knowledge of physics, is conveyed through poetry because it is the quickest way of memorizing the knowledge. And also, it holds it without change. Because when you describe something in a poetic manner, the rhythm and the grammar and so on has to stay the same. And therefore the piece of knowledge itself will be transmitted throughout the ages from one person to the other intact. This is fascinating, and this is a great discovery. But the issue is not this. The issue is that the next highest afterward is the various other information.